Have you ever wondered how foreign-made products get to the United States? Well, if you live on the East Coast and the product was made in China, Taiwan, or Vietnam, chances are pretty high that it went through the Panama Canal to get to you. The Panama Canal is a 50-mile ship canal that crosses the Isthmus of Panama. The canal connects the Caribbean with the Pacific Ocean. It saves a ship 4,500 miles compared to going around Cape Horn. The canal still remains one of the largest and most difficult engineering projects of all time. The innovative decision made by John Frank Stevens to control the mosquito population greatly impacted and changed the death rate as well as the rate of construction on the canal. But this project wasn't always as successful as it turned out to be. The canal was first attempted by the French under the leadership of Ferdinand de Lesseps. De Lesseps had just finished the Suez Canal in Egypt, which was a huge success, and was looking for another project. The French went into the project full force on January 1, 1880, with very little planning or prior study of the region. One major difference in Panama compared to Egypt is the environment. Panama is a rainy jungle, while Egypt is hot and dry. Tropical diseases such as malaria and yellow fever became a large problem for the workforce. The French had no idea that mosquitoes carried these diseases, and because of this, did nothing to try to control them. The French began dying in large numbers due to the presence of tropical disease. De Lesseps tried to make medical advancements in Panama by creating state-of-the-art hospitals, which were said to be the best and most advanced in all the tropics. This did nothing in helping to prevent the disease, though. Patients were exposed to the open air, allowing mosquitoes to come right into the hospital. Also, potted plants and the legs of furniture were placed in dishes of water to keep away ants. These water dishes offered the perfect conditions for the further breeding of mosquitoes right inside the hospital. The massive amount of death and sickness made construction almost impossible. The French were unable to keep the required amount of skilled professionals on the job when most became sick. In all, 22,000 men died while the French attempted construction. In 1893, the project was abandoned. The French company in charge went bankrupt and returned to their country a disgrace and a disappointment. A few years later, the United States, along with their leader Theodore Roosevelt, became interested in creating a canal in Panama. On January 22, 1903, a treaty was signed with the Colombian government, giving the U.S. control over the desired canal zone. Roosevelt then paid $40 million to gain control of the French equipment and excavation. And on May 4, 1904, work began under the control of Chief Engineer Frank John Stevens. John Frank Stevens laid the infrastructure that led to the U.S.'s success in the canal. Stevens, who was the vice president of Chicago Rock Island and Pacific Railroad, rebuilt the Panama Railway and devised an innovation of a system for the transportation of excavated dirt. But most importantly, he put his support behind what at the time was called the mosquito theory. If he had not done this, American workers would have continued to die, and the U.S. would have failed, just as the French did. This innovation alone saved the Panama Canal and allowed for it to become a reality. Cuban scientist Dr. Carlos Finley in 1881 had theorized that mosquitoes carried the tropical diseases malaria and yellow fever. This theory was confirmed by Dr. Walter Reed during the Spanish-American War in Cuba. The death rate due to yellow fever was heavily reduced in Havana under Reed's leadership. In only 45 years, the yearly deaths went from 1,309 to 18. Stevens hoped the same could be done in Panama, but Stevens unexpectedly resigned from his post as chief engineer due to stress. But the work he had started was completed by George Washington Goethals, who was appointed as chief engineer in 1907. Goethals began an extremely large sanitation project. Dr. William Gorgas, under Goethals, began to put many innovations for fighting disease into place. Gorgas explained his actions in a letter to another doctor. The foreman cut the brush and the undergrowth within 200 yards of all villages, houses, and dwellings, and he also cut the grass within this area, whenever it reached a foot in height. This was done for several reasons. The adult mosquito is destroyed by wind and sunlight, and he seeks all sorts of shrubbery, grass, and foliage for protection against both of these enemies. Therefore, if the brush, shrubbery, and high grass is cleared off within 200 yards around a dwelling, there is no shelter for the mosquito from either the wind or sunlight, and there are therefore no mosquitoes within this area. Clearing this zone exposes the ground to both sun and wind, and by these forces alone, Many of the smaller pools will be dried up and made unfit for mosquito breeding. I have often seen this measure alone, that is, the clearing of the zone, to cause a swampy place which I had expected to have to drain, to become dry and to cease to breed mosquitoes. Buildings were fumigated and searched for mosquito larvae. Carpenters were sent out to eliminate places where water could collect in buildings. Swamps and other wetlands were drained of standing water. Tall brush grass was cut back to shorter heights. Oil and insecticides were sprayed on any of the remaining standing water to prevent the survival of mosquito larvae. Drainage systems were made, and about 7,000 gallons of oil and 124,000 gallons of larvicide were used in the project each year. Gorgas also had screens put into public buildings and hospitals to keep the dreaded mosquitoes away. Diseased patients were quarantined in portable mosquito tents. This kept mosquitoes from biting the diseased patients and spreading the disease. Almost $20 million was spent on health and sanitation for the whole construction, but it had a large impact on the disease. By 1906, yellow fever had almost been completely eradicated, and the death rate for malaria had dropped significantly. With the disappearance of the problem of disease, work on the canal was able to begin full force. The change in conditions in Panama brought many new workers to the canal. Now people were not fearful of dying of malaria or yellow fever. Construction of the canal continued, and great things, such as the large man-made Gatun Lake, the Gatun Dam, the Calabra Cut, and the Great Gatun Locks, were constructed. In 1914, the canal was completed 2 years ahead of schedule. The canal was opened on August 15, 1914, to the passage of commercial ships, but the world gave little attention due to the outbreak of World War I. International shipping began with the use of the canal, and during World War II, the U.S. used the canal to transport their naval fleet between the Pacific and Atlantic effectively. This showed how much worth the canal had to the world for the first time. Because speed of movement is so important during war, it was necessary to swiftly move ships, and the canal did just that. The canal changed how ships were able to get past the American continent. The canal, along with the canal zone, continued to be controlled and governed by the U.S., but many Panamanians began to voice their opinions concerning the canal. Panama believed that they should rightfully own the canal. Protests were held and an increased military presence followed, and in 1974, negotiations began to make a new settlement. Soon after, President Jimmy Carter and Omar Torrijos signed the Torrijos-Carter Treaty on September 7, 1977. The agreement stated that the Panamanians could gain free control of the canal as long as permanent neutrality of the canal was promised. On December 31, 1999, the Panama Canal Authority, or the ACP, gained full control of the canal. The ACP still runs the canal and the traffic that passes through it. To this day, the canal zone is said to have the least amount of yellow fever and malaria in the region. The major innovation of controlling mosquitoes allowed America to complete one of its greatest engineering achievements of all time. America was able to accomplish the impossible. They were able to make a canal through 50 miles of disease-filled jungle, and they did it with great success. The canal allows shipping and the traveling of goods to happen twice as fast as without it. The Panama Canal is one of man's greatest accomplishments of all time.